Today I'll walk you through the full Dahlia Tuber home care process. So what you need to do in fall to get your dahlias out of the ground. We are going to dig them, clean them, divide them and store them all in this video. I know it might get a little longer for that reason because I want to show you the full process from the beginning to the end. But I promise I have the timestamps in the description so you can jump to the spot or to the area which you want to look at. As you can tell, we had our first frost this week. Everything looks really, really sad. You can also tell why this is the reason why we labeled our dahlias already a few weeks ago, because once they get nipped by the frost, they all look very much the same. They all turn black and mushy and the blooms fade to, like a brown, sad mess. So we'll walk you through the full process here. First, we got to clean that one out. So what I also can recommend is from the moment you want to follow along, make sure you wear something what can get dirty, because it's not a pretty process. So we need to wash off a lot of dirt. It gets wet, so make sure you might have a second set of clothes available. I have also some waterproof gloves, and I'll walk you through all the materials we'll need later, but it is going to be messy, so be prepared for that process. So we cleaned everything up. I'm a little bit out of breath, but yeah, all dahlias are cleaned. What I'm going to show you now is how we dig the tubers. So what is the best tool to dig tubers? It's a wide broad fork, so you don't pierce the tubers. Like with a shovel, you have really high likelihood that you go through a tuber or so. With a fork, it's a little bit easier and a little bit less the likelihood that you pierce through those tubers. When you want to dig up a tuber, you should always start a little bit further away, because how they grow is basically the stem, and they grow out like this wide. So I always try to start like a foot away from them. I plant them quite densely, so that's not so easy for me to do, but nevertheless I look where the stem is and I just try to be a foot away. Let me see with which one we start here. Let's start with this one. What is that? A blizzard. You can also see all my labels. That is why I labeled them, so when I pull up the stalk, I still have the label on and know exactly what I'm looking at. So for this one here, I start a little bit away, just go deep, and then push it like under and see what happens. Move around a little. If you have irrigation lines, make sure you don't pierce the irrigation lines. I am the biggest threat to my irrigation lines typically, so be mindful of that. But then we just try to lift it, and you can see that the stalk is already the stem is already coming up a little. And when I see that it's coming up wide, I typically try to move the soil away. We had a lot of rain this season, so my soil is quite compact, so I brush some soil off, and oh look, you can already see tubers coming up here. So when I'm feeling safe to pull it up, because you don't want to risk that the clump is breaking. Ooh, blizzard is always a nice one. And then I'll try to shake off as much soil as I can. Again, we had a lot of rain with a lot of earthworms sitting in that one too. So I'll try to shake it off. And yeah, and the rest needs to be washed off. But yeah, blizzards are always creating tubers like crazy. So that looks like a really, really beautiful tuber clump right here. Let's do another one quickly. So there's another blizzard, and you can already tell by the stem that was a big one. Ooh. Yeah, that's a really big one. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh, I just broke one off. No, that happens. All right. Oh, so much soil. Great. So that is what I'm doing most of the day and probably tomorrow to get through all my about 50 tubers. What I highly recommend is only dig as many as you can wash and divide on the same day, if that is your method of storing. You really don't want to have them sit out there somewhere getting dried and getting shriveled. That is the death to all tubers. So you really need to make sure that when you dig them and when you start going through the process that you can see it through to the end. That is very important. All right, on to the next step. I moved the Dahlia tub party here in the driveway because it's a little bit easier to clean. And what I typically do is I dig all tubers of one variety, so I have them all together and clean them here in the driveway and let them dry a little bit. So there we have a few which already sat here for an hour or so just to dry off a little bit. This just helps with like seeing the ice a little bit better to divide. And yeah, let's clean those ones here first. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we are looking for in terms of Dahlia diseases, which we want to rule out. And I've found already one example which looked questionable, which I can show you as well, what you need to look out for. All right, but let's clean those ones up here first. And it's a messy undertaking. I'll swivel them around so I get them from all sides. Just careful that you don't break any tubers. So I mentioned we're going to get dirty here today, so it's just what it is. So when we look at the tubers, you can see here we have different kind of tubers which look differently, which is perfectly normal. You have some which are small and knobby, other ones which are long. So yeah, they come in all sizes and shapes around here. When we look over here, we have here already some dry ones. Those have been cleaned decently, and that will help us to go and divide them soon. So whenever you clean tubers, you also want to look out for Dahlia tuber diseases, and there are two kinds which we want to look out for. One is called ground gall, and I have actually an example for it. I think I have an example for it, at least it looks suspicious. This is when the tuber doesn't look as pretty, where you can see the crowns connected to the stem, but it's like very, very compact and bulky, and I can actually show you this example in a second. So this is one of the tubers I suspect and I'm not using, because that is also a rule you can follow whenever you are suspicious of a thing or of a disease. Throw it out. Don't even waste your energy on it. And here we can tell, like, you see all this knobby growth, and like tubers usually don't look like potatoes. That should be always like a good sign. They can get large, but yet they are usually more wide, right? And you see all of this growth here, which looks rather abnormal. So for that one, I'm just going the safe route and throw it out, because typically what you have a lot of tubers, you have a little bit space in between. Those are just roots and stuff, but you have tubers who connect really, really nicely to the stem, and that is a more normal tuber. Let's talk a little bit about tuber dividing. Whenever I divide tuber, I put in the same amount of due diligence as I do it with cutting my flowers, which means I always have here some bleach and some soap solutions where I always dip in my snips in between tuber clumps. So I only use one snip for one tuber clump, and then it gets disinfected again, just for good hygiene practice. What I do when I separate them, I put them into a tray, let them a little bit dry, then I get marked, they get marked with the garden marker. So I have also each individual tuber labeled because you would be surprised how quickly you can mix up tubers in the greater scheme of things. So let's start dividing. That's where the fun part comes in. So whenever I look at a tuber or at a clump here, I start with getting rid of all the loose ends and the extra roots. I inspect my tubers if I find tubers which are pierced like that. Although this one, I'll show you something what I will do in a little bit with it. So let's just get started. I'll just cut everything to make it cleaner. Ooh. Like all those loose nooks and crannies. I also got to say I'm a little bit more ruthless with my tubers, so I don't have much space for storage, and I also know I won't need each and every single tuber next year because I don't have the space for it, which means I only take the tubers in which are really, really great quality. So for all the effort of storing, keeping them happy through the winter and everything, I want to make sure I have the high quality tubers saved to ensure optimal success, right? All right, so and why am I like getting rid of all the loose stuff? This can later in storage rot, and you really want to minimize the risk of rotting as much as you can. So now that we have got rid of all the loose stuff, let's inspect that clump. We have, when you come a little closer, we have here our old, is it this one? Yeah. Do you see that this tuber looks a little bit older than all the other ones around? This means that is the mother tuber. This is basically the tuber of which we grew all the new plant from. So I typically don't keep the tuber because those are more susceptible to rot. I know some keep them and have success with them, but again, like as I mentioned, I'm a little bit more ruthless with what I keep just because I don't have much space and I don't need as many next year, right? So I'll cut this one off. With this one here though, that is one where you can decide what you want to do. This is so long, will chop this one off. Ow. I just chopped this pierced portion off. And this will just heal over fine and will be a perfectly fine tuber next year. And this has still a great size because when we look here at the top of the tuber, we see some beautiful eyes. So I don't want to waste that one. So every tuber needs to have a body, a neck, and a crown with eyes to be successful next year in growing. And this one has such beautiful eyes, I didn't want to waste it. So what I'm going to do here is to cut that one out. And please watch your fingers, people. I don't want to have any complaints in the comment of cuts in the finger. So look at that. That is a beautiful tuber, which will store just fine. That cut on the bottom will heal over and it will still grow perfectly fine. So let's go to the next one. This one here is one which I can save as well, but I gotta say with such a long neck, I'm not sure if that's worth it because from the moment this would snap or break in storage because you're like, I don't know, have something laying on it or like just moving it around. This is something what won't grow if from the moment this breaks here. So that is a questionable one. I'll look at the other ones first before I move on with that one. But here is another perfect one with a body, a neck, and a crown with beautiful eyes on it. So I'll cut this one out here as well. And I literally just go in and snip those ones out. So sharp snips are key to this whole exercise. Just be careful to not break the neck in the effort. Whoop. Yep, so this is another beautiful tuber. It's also important to understand that you can't save them all, so you have to sacrifice a few for the greater good of the rest. So to think that you are able to save all of the tubers here is just not realistic, because they either don't have an eye, or you have to cut through one crown to get to another one. So I would say like half of the tubers which I have on a clump I can save if they're of good quality. So that one was a good one too. That's beautiful. Yeah. Oh, here's a good example, or actually two examples of broken necks. Do you see those two here? How they're dangling? There's no worth of saving those ones. Again, broken necks, nothing will grow with those ones, so you can cut those ones off. And this is how you step by step eliminate what you have here, but this is a beautiful one. All the Bloomquist compare tubers I'm going to plant next year. Everything else is bonus. That's beautiful. Okay. I'll try saving this one, seeing what happens. Sometimes it's just interesting to see what kind of tubers you can overwinter successfully, just for experience purposes, right? So this one won't take much space up, but I'm just curious to see. It feels a very, very rigid neck, so I'll give it a chance. But the rest, yeah, this is not a great tuber. This one, I can't see an eye on it. And this is the mother tuber. So that is a beautiful example of like, this goes into the trash and this is what we can save. So I would say like, yeah, 50-50 trash versus save tubers, but we have 2, 4, 6, 7 tubers. I would say like 6 really good ones and 1 questionable one. But yeah, that is how we move along. Then those snips get cleaned and off we go. Labeling is important. So Q. I always have like a little abbreviation. So this is my Bloomquist compare, so BLQC. So I don't have to write too much on it. Work smarter, not harder, right? And then we will see in the next step how I actually store them, but that will come later today or tomorrow. So let's talk about how we store the dahlia tubers after we divided them. So there are many, many ways you can store your dahlias. What I would suggest though is to do a little bit of research for what other people in your area, in your climate, do for storage purposes. So I, for example, observed a few of the dahlia growers in my area here. We have it in the summer super humid, but from the moment summer is gone, it flips to almost no humidity here, so super dry air. Most of the growers around here for larger sized dahlia, like dahlia farms, etc., they store their tubers in vermiculite. I tried that when I started. I actually did like 2 different sets. I had like one set one set of tubers stored in vermiculite and the other one in the plastic wrap method, just to compare them. And that is something what I would recommend for you as well. If you can't settle on a method to start with, do 2 different kind of ways and compare them how they work for you and your climate. A few good resources which I used in the beginning was clearly one of my favorite books is Discovering Dahlias from Floret. Shows all the details, and actually that is where I got my plastic wrap method from. And then just recently, Christine Albrecht came out with a really great Dahlia book as well, which shows you everything you need to know about dahlias, from growing over disease management, over how to store them. It's a beautiful, gorgeous book. So I have both linked in the description as well, so you don't have to look for them. The method which works really, really great for me is the plastic wrap methods. For home gardeners who don't have many tubers to preserve, or not the space to preserve like the clump just as they are, for example, as many people do until the spring comes around, the plastic wrap method has worked for me awesome. Like 95% of my tubers make it. I'll show you how I wrap them. What is important is you got to divide them up front, because I don't think that method will be successful if you leave them as clump, because I think you have too much like air or risk rotting with that. So you got to divide them. What you need to make sure of is, when you have your Dahlia tubers divided, to let them dry where you had cuts, because otherwise the risk of rotting is really, really high. What I also recommend is to label each and every single tuber, not with a full name, but like with an abbreviation you will recognize again. And yep, and then I typically wrap them in like 3 to 4 tubers at a time, like I'll show you in a second, but that has worked very well for me. Again, they store great. I think last year I stored over 200 tubers this way, and I had in total, I think, like 10 tubers, which were not great or had some issues. The other really, really big benefit with this method is also that you eliminate or like isolate problems. If you have like some weird bug or like mold issue going on with one package, you don't translate that like to a full box where other tubers are sitting in as well, right? So you hedge your bets very well, let's say it like this. So let's see how I'm doing it. So I'll have here the plastic wrap. I prefer the cling wrap, which clings very nicely to each other. I have some paper cards just to again label them also from the outside. And then I have here my first set of tubers, which I divided in the morning. Typically I try to wrap them like 8 to 24 hours after I divided them, otherwise they start to shrivel. So the time window is small. As I mentioned earlier when we started digging them, only dig what you can wash, divide, and process at the day or the day after at the very latest. Otherwise you risk wasting or really ruining your tubers in total. So you don't want that, so be mindful of how much time you have to really follow through and see it through with the full process. So what tubers do we have here? We have here my beloved Bloomquist Compare, and another great one from this year, the Bloomquist Golden, like the pretty anemone style yellow ones with all the bumblebees I shared on my socials this year so much. So I'm really excited that I got good tubers out of them. And what I do, I'll just get a good size wrap here, and then I'll take one tuber, start rolling it in, take another one, so give them 2, 3, 4 moves, start to roll the edges in, make a little longer. I usually pick tubers who feel like they fit together in one package, and then like one more. It's totally up to you how you do it. You can single wrap them. I feel single wrap a little bit too much effort, to be honest, because you also want to label them. Then that is the Bloomquist Golden. And I typically also put the number of tubers on it. So in this case we had 4 tubers, so put that on, 2 more rounds, and then there you have your beautiful little tuber package for overwintering. What you also always need to look out for is when you have tubers with skinny necks, to make sure to not put any pressures on the neck. So I always make sure I'll put them into the package so they are relaxed and have no pressure on them. And yeah, that is how I plug along, packing all my tubers. So that was 3 tubers. Yep. I'm curious to hear if you have any experience with like tuber packaging or like tuber storing, what works for you and in which area you are. You can put that in the comments. Always curious to see what other people do. This is clearly not a method which I would do if I had hundreds or thousands of tubers. That's also very clear, but I think that's a perfect method for the home gardener who want to preserve their tubers for the rest of the year. Let's discuss a little bit where I store them for the winter. I have them in our unfinished basement, which is not heated, on the ground at approximately 52 53, 54 degrees. Typically, if you look in the resources, they recommend to store dahlia tubers at like 40 to 45 degrees, but I'm getting away with the 50-ish degrees typically. Again, I've done that a couple years in a row now, and it worked always well. Anything below 60 degrees puts the tubers into dormancy, so makes them sleep over the winter. And I think why I'm getting away with those slightly higher temperatures is because they are consistent for the entirety of the winter. They never dip further down or have any fluctuations in it, because that is the only risk which you could see with those plastic wraps. From the moment you have fluctuation in the temperatures, you could run into the risk that the tubers are, or that they start to condensate in the plastic wrap, and any type of additional moisture definitely leads to rotting. So that is something what you should consider. For me, this very, very consistent, not super lowish, but low temperature works. And what I do once I put them into storage, I typically check on them like once a week and see if any of those turned mushy, because sometimes you can't see if a tuber is rotting in the inside. So you gotta check that, or you just don't know, but you will really fairly know once the tubers are put into storage, because I'll typically go once a week and just like touch the packages and see if the tubers are still firm. Any type of rotting tubers turns mushy and soft, and that is then the moment when you can still intervene and open the package again, take that rotting tuber out and save the other one. So that is what I meant with like those small packages really limit the risk of like you ruining with a faulty tuber your entire stock, right? So you really hedge your bets wildly. So yeah, I hope that was an interesting video for you. Very tactical. It's a long process to get all tubers dug up and stored. Probably takes me 2 straight days, and probably plus 1 or 2 more extra days to wrap all the tubers, but it's worth it, right? So just looking here at my Bloomquist Compare, those were like 4 plants, and that is all the tubers I get out of 4. So I think it's like 20-25 tubers out of 4 plants. That is really, really amazing. And it's a friend maker. You can share it with your friends. I will most likely have a Dahlia tuber giveaway in spring again, when I know all the tubers have made it, and the ones I want to plant. So I'll typically raffle off the leftovers. I did this last year. It was a lot of fun. So look out for that in probably March. But yeah, that is what concludes gardening season slowly but surely. It's sad, but it's also relaxing. I'm ready for a break. So if you have any questions regarding the process I showed you today, leave me the question in the comments, and I'm happy to answer what I can. Otherwise, subscribe and watch another video. Thank you.